Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Tech to Transform, the Mantis podcast. In our latest instalment, I sat down with Medtech Innovations editor Ian Bolland to discuss the medtech market. With the continued drive to digitise and connect systems across health and social care, we discuss if there remains a dividing line between health tech and medtech. We also talk about how the pandemic has driven a new wave of tech companies into the market, and we recap the future tech trends across the healthcare sector. Take a listen. Ian, thank you so much for joining me today. It's nice to see you. We haven't spoken in a while. We were just saying the last time we saw each other was actually in person, wasn't it? So, which was some time ago, I think.
Oh, Manchester 2019,
Yeah.
I think. Oh, well, there you go. It's all blended into one, Rebecca. So
yeah. The world was a very different place then, wasn't it?
Very much so.
So we're going to talk about medtech and health tech today, and the difference between the two, or if there is a difference, going to be discussing that. So I thought you were the perfect person to get in because of your background and your knowledge on this. So can we start with you? Can we talk about your background and your current role at the moment?
Well, it's a bit of an embarrassing way to put this, but the way I got into covering life sciences was that I did a master's at the University of Liverpool after being jobless for a little bit, and then this is the job that came up. In all honesty, you apply and you get it, and you build up your knowledge of the industry that way. So, yeah, I've been working across our life sciences stable at Rapid News for must be the best part of 3 years now. Throughout that time, I've worked on Medtech innovation, but I've also covered medical plastics news and European pharmaceutical manufacturer. And prior to that, you'll have known that we had an old site called Digital Health Age, which a lot of which has folded into our existing titles ever since we closed it, just because we actually found that there's sufficient crossover across the other sectors of life sciences.
Yeah. And how's it been kind of, so you say you've been there for 3 years, you must have seen kind of lots of changes since then in the market, and obviously you say the company's kind of evolved and developed. So what's it been like, I suppose, we'll get on to COVID obviously in a lot more detail a little bit later on, but the past kind of year, how has it been for you kind of just doing your everyday job? Has it been a challenge kind of doing it from home and kind of getting the content and that sort of thing?
I actually like the home working environment, and I hope people take note of that. You know who they are. But yeah, I like the working from home bit, but in such an incredibly busy time. I mean, my job has changed since that. Now I've become editor of Medtech Innovation. It has, the home working environment actually helped me basically focus on just the sheer volume that's come in. It's not just simply writing anymore. There's the podcast element. There's I commission far more pieces. I feel like I have a degree more control, and people now think I'm a bit more important than I really should be given credit for, in all honesty. But yeah, it's a nice ego boost, I'll not lie. But but yeah, I've actually really enjoyed taking the magazine on, because I came on the magazine full time about, I think it was June last year. So at the height of panic, really, and the height of everybody developing new products and new innovations, and you just hit with this wall of stuff coming at you, whilst the rest of the economy is going into a downturn. Everybody else has the struggles as well. I mean, we felt it as well, by the way. I mean, because it's a business that covers very, very different sectors. It covers 3D printing and plastics as well, but you're actually you're acutely aware of both the effects it has on industries, whilst it's an opportunity for life sciences to come to the fore.
Absolutely. And I think you probably were out and about a lot, like me, a lot before the pandemic, whereas now obviously from home. It's interesting that you say you've got time to kind of look at everything, or you feel like you've got a lot more time to kind of process everything that comes in. That must have been really useful when you say that incredibly busy time at the start of the pandemic, when there were in the sector, lots of new products and things coming out.
Yeah, 100%. But I'm also looking forward to the day where I can actually get out and have a look at new innovations up close and personal, because I think the last interview I did was February last year. So it was sort of on our radar, but you could still go and see people in person. Mass gatherings are still allowed. I mean, I think we can we'll try and avoid my feelings on whether they came into those restrictions came in too early, too late, whatever. But yeah, it was a very interesting time knowing that these things were not going to last forever. But there was also this uncertainty of, well, how long is this going to last? And here we are, still cooped up in our bedrooms. So it's I can't wait to get back out there and see people individually, but I like the home working life.
Yeah, like a mix of both, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
So could you tell us more about Medtech Innovation then as well? So it's a magazine and you've got lots of different other elements as well. Could you just kind of run through those?
Yeah, obviously the magazine's 6 issues a year, normally. We usually cover the medical device manufacturing materials, anything from manufacture to the end of the supply chain, really. So it's that entire process. And coupled with that, we've got our own event, which is Medtech Innovation Expo, which will be in person. And we're back on the 28th and 29th of September at the NEC, now that the shackles of restrictions are off, when we commence on the 19th. So by the time that people probably watch or listen to this, they'll be able to go about their everyday lives, as close to normal as it was. But yeah, we'll be back in person. There's 3 stages of that show. There's the introducing stage, there's the health tech stage, and there's the conference stage. I think we do it in partnership with Medilink UK as well. They've got their own pavilion there. So yeah. And what else have we got to push aside from that? Oh yeah, the podcast, the MedTalk podcast is run alongside the rest of our life science brands, which I mentioned before, in medical plastics use and European pharmaceutical manufacturer. As you can imagine, there's been a lot to talk about on the podcast lately. Apparently some event happened that means we're all stuck at home for some reason.
So I've got a question for you a little bit later on about the rise of sort of devices and technology that we've seen since March last year. And I think it'd be really interesting to hear from you on that side. But there's something that I just picked up on then when you said you've got a health tech stage at your event. So I've got a question about is there a difference between med tech and health tech? So this kind of comes from at Mantis. We obviously have lots of different clients all in the health tech sector, but we kind of sort of split them up by obviously what products or services they offer, and then we tailor our sort of campaigns accordingly to that. But we tend to have kind of had a bit of a line between the two, because to us, medtech was sort of these non-connected, non-digital clinical device manufacturers. So things like tools to help surgeries, surgical robots, that sort of thing. Whereas with health tech, it was a lot more kind of the operational, administrative, back office function, that sort of thing. So something like an EPR, which of course both of them go on to help lead to better clinical outcomes, but sort of in very different ways, I suppose, different approaches to it. But today we're seeing and we're hearing lots more about the two sort of overlapping, because there's this huge drive to digitize everything, and also more importantly to kind of connect everything. We hear so much about joined up care particularly across health and social care sectors, but all across healthcare for all different treatments, all different types of patients, having that one kind of seamless link through all of the technology. Do you see that as, in your mind, in the way you approach it, are they two separate things, or have they always been connected, or are they more connected now than they were before?
It's probably possible that everything you said there is right, because I think there is a nuance to all of this in terms of, I think there's medtech, there's health tech, and there's system support. And I think what you described as health tech in terms of the back office, the EPR thing, I think that falls into system support, because I think a lot of the technology there you can actually apply to different industries standalone, for example, because I think you can, a lot of it is data gathering and recording in a digitized manner. And I think you can apply that to any industry, and you not really need to change it for health in terms of how it works. There's probably certain safeguards that you've got to put into place purely because of the sensitive nature of the information. The difference between medtech and health that you were talking about in terms of the connectivity, I think it's right on a level in terms of non-connected side of things, i.e. materials that end up being used in devices, the actual practice of putting together a device and all the investigation and the research that goes into it, along with, how can I put this? Along with the connectivity element, I think the digital side of it, as long as it actually is it's a really interesting way of putting it, because this is a very difficult subject to define, because I think you appreciate that in the terms of how long-winded I made this answer. But I think, yeah, EPR and CPR, I see that more as system support. Connected health, if you have a connected medical device, it's still medtech as far as I'm concerned. But I think the line between medtech and healthtech is increasingly blurred. But I think that healthtech has moved towards medtech and away from system support, if you follow me.
Yeah.
It's so, I think, yeah, medtech and healthtech are broadly coming onto the same page. I appreciate there was a difference beforehand, but now I think it's closer now than ever. But I think we'll probably come on to how the pandemic has changed things. But I think this was always in the offing in a way, because there was a conversation that I had with Liz Ashall-Payne from Orca. I don't know if you know them, but it was a case of, she actually told me that this was always going to happen, because there was always technology out there for, say, like remote monitoring and remote consultation, for example. By the way, I'll probably put remote consultation into health tech because it serves a specific purpose, even though you can argue that it's still like a video call between me and you, like we're having right now, for those that are watching the video version. But it serves a specific purpose, that is about a person's health. It's a really nuanced area to actually try and split up the three, I think. But yeah, I think this was always coming back to, the digital imprint was always going to be there. It's probably just accelerated by about 3 or 4 years. And certainly that's what Liz said to me, and I'm inclined to agree with her.
Yeah. Well, should we talk about kind of the impact of the pandemic on that then? So, I mentioned there that kind of the blurring of the lines in, just from what I can see from my point of view, is that because the need to have more joined up systems was accelerated massively by the pandemic. So perhaps maybe that's kind of making sure that, because medtech was, I think, maybe originally designed to serve a very specific purpose, where I think now, health tech and medtech joining together is about that continuity of care across the board, which has always been something, in the distance, hasn't it, that the health sector has wanted to aim for, but I think now saw a very immediate overnight need, to have that sort of service. But so if we can go back to kind of what you've seen since March, the type of news that you've been covering and the types of kind of trends and things you've seen, we just take it back to from then until now, if you like, and if you can recap that.
That does seem to blur into one, I must admit. I've uncovered everything from ventilator challenges to diagnostics to remote care. I mean, one thing's for certain is that I think artificial intelligence has come onto everybody's radar a lot more. It seems to be a big buzzword, as does, basic apps as well. I mean, I don't think that I think people always had some kind of awareness when it came to keeping track of their own health, especially if they were physically active. People that went to the gym regularly, or now go to the gym regularly because of whatever circumstances, they now keep track of the heart rate, how many steps they're doing a day, etc., etc. But I don't think there was that particular kind of awareness from those that probably weren't as active, if you follow me. And I think you will see that people have got more health apps on their phones, for example. I think more people have downloaded the NHS app now, for example, because of COVID certification. That might be one example, but it serves much more needs in terms of, people can do more from home because they've had to. I mean, I think that's the big umbrella message from it all, is that everyone can do more sitting down, like we're doing right now, and that goes for health as well. There'll always be a need for in-person, and there'll always be a need for an in-person consultation, if you ask me, because not everybody's going to be as trusting. for one. And two, there are certain things that I think you can only evaluate when you are in person. For example, you try getting my dad using something that is a digital consultation. I mean, I'm actually surprised he uses the NHS app. That actually did blow me away. But I think he's actually found it useful. In terms of he can actually go out and do things. So I think if you give people the tools and tell people that they need to use them, then of course it's gonna accelerate change. But though, yeah, it's like I said before, I always thought this kind of thing was on the horizon. It's probably just accelerated by about 3 or 4 years. But yeah, people are more aware of artificial intelligence. But I think the diagnostics industry has also taken a big step forward in this, because I think people now use the term lateral flow a lot more in layman's speak, because people didn't realize that lateral flow diagnostics were also the tools used for pregnancy kits, for example. I mean, especially if you're male, because you'll never need to do one. But it's now that people are aware that they can do tests in their own home for much more wider scale of conditions, I think that appetite's going to stay, for example, because why would you need to go out and wait a week for an appointment, or when if the test is available on the NHS and then it's there for free, you can do it instantly. It gets delivered to your door and you can join it up to your health records. That element of connected health and Medtech and healthtech, that's where the line becomes blurred, and now it's all jumbled into one.
And it's much more just focused on the individual using that technology, isn't it? So that, for example, lateral flow test in your home, if a person wasn't on board with that, didn't understand it before, there was so many more steps in the process for them to perhaps have some sort of test that they needed. Whereas now, do you think people will be much more open to say your GP said, "Oh, I'll send you a test kit." We've all done that for COVID anyway. So that's completely changed the culture, just as you say, just in one small market, hasn't it?
Yeah, precisely that. But I think I can't see me personally. I can't see me going to the doctors all the time if I think I've got something wrong with me. Then again, I was never really a fan of the doctors anyway, because of it'll show up in any kind of blood pressure results I've had taken. The white coat syndrome goes like that. That's not great radio what I've just done there, so apologies about that one. But I genuinely can't see why there's going to be so many people. It's a great pressure reliever. I think that's one thing. I mean, we can have a discussion about what else needs to be done aside from the technology, because technology itself won't sort any kind of pressures and change, addressing the backlog. There's going to have to be a lot more investment in personnel for that, but it's one element that we can all do to help. And as the population becomes more health literate and digital literate, that is going to help. But I will say one caveat about digital health is that although all these technologies and all these connected technologies, they are wonderful, and I think we should do everything we can to adopt them into our everyday life. I would also caution that everything digital can break at least once.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to, I think it's topics that have come up when I've had podcasts for different sectors. We've said it's looking at technology as an enabler. It's not a solution to everything. So it's coming in and enabling you to do something you hadn't done before, or maybe speed up a process, or maybe make a process more secure, or something like that. Or it's maybe freeing up, a team's time to then concentrate on something else that they couldn't do before. It's not coming in to solve all the problems, is it? It's something that's supposed to help a service evolve and improve, hopefully, and enable you to do other things. It's, as you say, it's not something that should be kind of just a straight replacement or a swap for something, or people will always need to go and see a doctor in person, won't they? So it's it's bearing all of that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, there's only in so many instances that a doctor can really gauge the amount of pain that you might be in from a certain injury. You can't really, I mean, for as much as that you can probably record your symptoms to them, or even if you think you've suffered a bad fracture, for example. I mean, for those that are squeamish, please do not imagine this, but imagine, say, you dislocated your kneecap. and you just want to take a photograph and just say, does this look right? And then say, no, you probably need to go for an X-ray. But in terms of more, say, nuanced conditions, where there's always going to be that need for examinations. Of course, technology can be there to help enable and speed up the process, but there's always going to be that need for face-to-face consultations and that physical interaction, because I think there tends to be a lot of stories about, or a lot written about, will AI ultimately replace humans? I can't see it somehow, but never say never. I've been wrong about a lot of things before.
It's the age-old argument, really, isn't it? I used to when I worked in education, there was this argument for EdTech. We'd say, "Are computers going to replace teachers?" And then we'd always say, "Of course not." But they can help teachers. They can improve teachers, working day and improve services. And at the end of the day, but they're not. They shouldn't ever be thought of as kind of replacing anything, I don't think. Or if they are, then it's to allow you to do something else.
Yeah, I think education's actually a really good example for crossing over with health, because it's not just the teaching element and providing knowledge to youngsters. There's also that emotional support element. I don't think you get that from a computer. You always get that from a human being.
Yeah. So in kind of your role as editor, then, since if I can put it into context from my side, when the pandemic first started back in March last year, it was very busy for Mantis, actually, because we were working with lots of different companies who really wanted to get their message out there about what they produce and how they work kind of in their respective sectors, and particularly in healthcare, because obviously all eyes were on healthcare at that time, and still are now. So for us, it was very much about kind of getting that message across and making the people who needed to know, make them aware that there was this kind of technology out there. I suppose in your role as editor, that must have been quite similar as well, but of course you were able to kind of see a bit of a wider landscape and kind of make a choice of what you wanted to include in your publication, I suppose. So what was that editorial process like? How did you choose kind of stories to go with? Was it about products that were already having a big impact, or were you looking at much wider landscape? Were you looking at kind of government policy? Was it a bit of everything?
You know what, I'm racking my brain to think back. Did I actually make the conscious choice to separate everything out, because so much came in at once? It was hard not to cover government policy, because I think in the centre of it still is at the centre of politics. Medtech and life sciences, because of COVID, is still at the centre of government policy. So it's something that we certainly kept a closer eye on it over the past 18 months or so as a result. It's funny that you actually mentioned that it was a busy time for you, because the volume of other companies that we probably wouldn't necessarily hear from, who are actually putting it out there saying that we can do this. There was, I'm not saying that it was purely business focused in the sense of this. Here is an opportunity for us to diversify. Ultimately, it can be, but I think the nature of those organisations and individuals was just a sense of wanting to help at first, and then it evolved into, we can actually do this, and we can actually, the nature of the society we live in is that this can be another arm to the business. I mean, throughout every, it sounds a bit crass to say, but in every crisis there is an opportunity in the world of business. So there was that element as well, but it really was just a case of covering absolutely everything. I don't think I've been so busy in all my life. I mean, I think June and July I've tended to be quieter times a year. You just look at our site numbers, for example, but last June and July, I think it was quieter than March and April, because that was the height of, we're first going into a big panic, and then that was the first lifting of restrictions. But there was still that need out there for, do we have necessary ventilators? Do we have enough testing? Do we have a vaccine development? And then there's the remote treatment, and then there's what artificial intelligence can do. And then there was just so many things just thrown together. And then aside from the pandemic in medtech, you've also got regulatory changes that have been brought about both by medical device regulation in the European Union, which was delayed by a year, and then you got the in vitro diagnostic device regulation, which are coming into effect next year. And then you've got regulatory changes with Brexit and the UKCA mark that's going to come in 2023. So you've got, wasn't just the pandemic for us, it was a load of regulation chucked in and all these businesses having to adapt. I think, I don't want to talk down other industries here. I really want to talk about what life science has done. I think any other industry, it could have been absolute panic, but I think life sciences and medtech has just shown how resilient it is, having all of these factors thrown together, and then it's gone, boom. We can sort all this out.
That's really interesting, actually. Yeah. So you said it was really busy in June, July last year. What's it been like this year? Is it sort of been? I mean, we all know we haven't returned to normality, but it certainly feels different to last year, doesn't it? So how is it for you at the moment?
I wouldn't say it's not busy, but it feels a little bit quieter. It feels like you're still getting stories about testing coming through. There's still novel diagnostics being developed. I think there's one that I've put on the website today that let's detect the difference between cold and flu viruses and then COVID, because I think everyone's anticipating that we could be facing another influenza wave in the autumn, and then we're living with COVID as well. And I think that's an opportunity that is a necessary tool that might actually come into play, where people have to detect between, as a person got COVID and as a person got flu very, very quickly. And I think those kind of tools are going to be, incredibly important going forward.
And there's been lots of talk about, we've already touched on as well, kind of the rate of acceleration of new products and services. And you say, it probably things were going to happen anyway, but it's been accelerated by about 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. Then there's also been lots of talk about making the most, the COVID effect, isn't it? Making the most of that acceleration and not kind of just instantly reverting back to the way things were. And as we talked about, kind of 19th of July for us is when we are going to have lifting of restrictions, and people are very eager to kind of do things that they haven't done for a long time and all that sort of thing. So are we still in that kind of danger zone, do you think, of things and maybe losing the progress that we've made? Or do you think now, from what you've seen and heard in your role, are we past that now? Are we already in kind of using those new ways of working and now become a way of life?
It's a good question, but I think there's also 2 sides to this coin. I think from everybody I've spoken to, it'll be the patients and the users will help these kind of innovations stick. But it doesn't take that long to develop a habit. I think there's the old adage that it takes 30 days to develop a habit. And I think, well, if we've had, 400, 450. Mm-hmm. So I think, there might be a little bit of reversion back to the norm, but I would imagine that there has been that progression. We've probably taken a couple of years out of what would have been, I'm sorry to borrow what has lately become a political term, the roadmap to digitalization, in terms of, there's been there is a habit of we can do more in the home setting rather than the care setting. One thing that I actually, from a previous question before, I've just had a look at my own notes, is that it is the present as well as the future, in terms of prior to the pandemic. Actually, I've had a look at virtual reality and how that can help certain conditions. For example, some of the most clinically vulnerable now will be those that have had, those that are probably going through rehab, that have had, for example, they've had a stroke, and building up those cognitive functions in a setting where they feel safe, I think might actually become, really, really important. So those vulnerable people are protected, but it is just the case now of, do we have enough technology provision to get it out into the community? And that is going to be a huge challenge for, I think that isn't just going to be a challenge for this government and the NHS as it stands now. That could be around for, the next decade, possibly even more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much more of a long-term kind of picture on it all, isn't it? So what can the government do to kind of support those health tech and med tech companies that, there might be startups, or there might be companies that have had huge success throughout the pandemic, but obviously, as we were saying, it's kind of more of a long-term view now, isn't it? Can the government be doing lots more than it has done to support those companies?
You tempted me onto a soapbox here. First of all, engage. Literally, just ask them, what do you need? I've heard both examples of good and bad of how the government has acted when it comes to working with certain businesses. I think there's been a lot of well-publicised things in terms of PPE, in terms of allegations of preferential treatment, for example. But those that have actually, I know that were with the government and were approached by them, said that ventilator challenge was a very good example, actually. That there was always this sense of urgency. There was always the sense of, here's what we need, can you do it? So I think that's a good example of give people, if you want something from the industry itself, be clear as to what you want. You know, I mean, there's room for nuance everywhere, but not in the state of emergency. But yeah, engage mostly with life sciences. What do they need to thrive? I think there have actually been some really good examples, and I think we're actually going to touch on the likes of, the Medtech funding mandate, for example. But I think I've heard one or two complaints that given that it's in its early stages, there's going to be teething problems. So if it goes beyond that funding, then what next? How do you get it into the NHS properly? And I think that as long as a clear pathway is there from the start for these new ventures, or even if it's just existing ventures and they've got new technology, and it's a case of we want to see directly how this can impact the front line, then give them a clear pathway and show them how you can work with them to get them to the front line. So engage with them and just be there with them all the way, really, will be the two main things that I'd say. Just because if there's any lack of communication, and I don't want to go back on somebody's soapbox again, then people get confused, and not just that, but you can lose potential as well. So be fully engaged with the sector. That's that. I think I've said that about 4 times now, which just shows I cannot emphasize that enough.
Yeah. I think I see a lot of when we work, so for GP surgeries, for example, they're so many are so keen to try out different technology, but it's about having the resource to do that. So there has been some great schemes by the government in the last year that have enabled them to try out different technology. Like you say, it's about continuing that support all the way down the line, isn't it? Not just to get them over the final line. It's that that where they find their customer is ready to kind of purchase and implement this new technology. It's all those different stages, isn't it? That in medtech and health tech, it is about trial and error and seeing what technology works for you and your patients. So is that support all the way through, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there was actually a really interesting point that came to mind there when you mentioned GP surgeries, and I think there's been a lot of promises on the health side of things that that will go down well with the public. I think the construction of 40 new hospitals seems ambitious. Turns out it's a bit of a regeneration integration, but these matter to the innovators as well. This isn't just about patient care. This matters about, well, we've got something here. Is the hospital sufficiently upgraded for us to operate our technology in that environment, for example? So as well as engagement, be transparent, and don't I know you've got an election to win, but sometimes it's a few years away. Just be upfront as in terms of what is actually happening. I mean, I'm sure plenty of innovators are probably finding this out for themselves and don't need this to be in the public domain, but it must infuriate them. So it's a case of be transparent as well as engaging, because that way you will get the best results. There won't be anybody falling through the cracks, both in terms of the innovation side and both in terms of that person hasn't got the treatment that they should have got, or hasn't been able to do it in a more environment that's comfortable for them. So those two elements I think are really, really key going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I talk about your title a little bit more now, kind of your role within the media, and perhaps talk about the media and kind of medtech on a bit of a sort of give it more of a focus.
Yeah.
Your publication, I suppose you'd be classed as a trade publication. So, but of course you follow kind of the national narrative. You know, you talked about the type of content that you were looking at during the pandemic and obviously now. So you're kind of, I suppose you always have to keep an eye on what's happening kind of at a national level and kind of front-facing consumer level as well. But your core readership, I suppose, isn't kind of the everyday person, is it? So I suppose how does that kind of national narrative kind of shape the stories that you run? I suppose there's a place for it within that wider narrative, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I think people think of trade publications as talking to each other, if I'm putting it kindly, but that's not saying that we're the echo chamber of Twitter or anything like that. It's a case of, I would suggest that our magazine in particular it's both an experience and educational read, in terms of here's an idea, here's what we did, and here's how, I don't think people are giving away trade secrets in terms of, reliving their experiences. I think people are just getting ideas from it and say, for example, if a competitor that operates in clean room environments has an issue, they've seen something from their competitor and they just thought, okay, they're not giving anything away there, but they've kicked around ideas. I mean, excuse me, I think it's a case of it almost, I'd like to think it sort of drives progress in the industry. I mean, I've probably given our own egos a little bit of a boost there, probably unfairly, but I would like to think that having that interaction in terms of, I think this is actually coming back to a story that I had on a trade show when I was working with my colleagues on the Farmer magazine, in terms of that I went down to the show floor and said, I understand that you might be interested in, a couple of features in this area, for example. And they just said, oh yeah, a couple of our colleagues on the manufacturing floor, regularly read through that to get new ideas. And that was the first, I think that was the first time I really understood the purpose of trade publications, in terms of, it probably seems a little bit promotional from, say, if you're in consumer journalism, for example, and everyone just thinks, well, that's just an advert. I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, in the sense of they've got something to get out there, and the target audience also happens to be people that will be buying it. So of course it's going to be looking a little more promotional, and they're trying to get ideas from it. So as well as, the obvious thing of course people are trying to sell things in a way, just, we obviously make it less promotional in tone, but it's a way for people to gain ideas, acquire skills in a way, and connect with other people. And I think that's why our magazine actually runs so nicely alongside the show.
Absolutely, yeah. So what kind of story wouldn't make it into your magazine then?
Oh, good question. You sent me the questions in advance and I still haven't got a proper answer to this. So that shows you how much it's changed, really. But I think it's more of a case of, we tend to be more focused on putting things together rather than the end, if you follow me. As long as anything that is specific to our sector, i.e. something that's been repurposed, for example, I think we talked earlier about how I defined the support system element when we talked about Medtech, healthtech, and etc. The support element, given that it didn't really need repurpose for the industry, then I probably wouldn't include that, for example. But something that has been repurposed for Medtech, then obviously that I think that's something that people need to know about within the industry. But yeah, anything really from new materials at the start, new ideas, new components. People might think this is very dry, but once you actually get into the nub of it, then you realize that something that smallest cog in the machine can actually be part of life-saving treatment at the end of the day. So anything from the start, the littlest component, the material, the way it's put together, all the way to, and this is how we want it to look at the end.
Do you always want a story that comes to you with kind of a full clear view of what, say it's a product, for example, obviously you want to know what the product does, but do you want it kind of completely in context? So do you want it completely explained about how this is going to revolutionize something, or how it's claiming to, you know, improve outcomes for patients or for people? Or do you need it to be that far down the track, or can it literally be kind of an idea and then you will find the kind of, you'll create the rest of the story?
Well, it doesn't need to be that far down the track, because I wouldn't say that I create the rest of the story. I think that you probably get taught differently when you're doing a journalism degree, is that you probably need to pretend that the audience is a bit dim, and I don't buy that, especially in our industry. People are well aware of the effects that new technologies can have, and if it's just a case of an idea in development, or a new material that can be support for an idea, then it's something that I'll always look at, as long as the vision feels clear. I mean, don't get me wrong, if people want to explain that it's going to revolutionize this, that and the other, fine, include it. I mean, great, you've got a clear vision, and great, you know how to sell a story properly to me. But sometimes it doesn't have to be as whistles and bells as that.
Yeah. And I suppose having those industry voices, as you say, especially with the trade publication, it's all about kind of talking to each other, learning from each other. So having those key kind of voices within the industry, that's probably something that you're looking for all the time, isn't it? Just kind of checking in with those people, seeing what they're up to, asking their specific views on certain topics, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I actually say this when I'm commissioning pieces, is that if I've got a feature on a certain topic area coming up, I always say that, well, you're the expert, I'm the editor, I just edit it. So, the floor is yours in terms of the topic area, but if there's anything that you need, any ideas that you need to kick around with me, then feel free. But yeah, the talking to each other element, I've probably been a bit unkind there, because you always get new people coming in from, whether that's from academia, for example, or people that just want to find out more. I think we, as well as talking to each other, we need to have a tone that is both not patronizing but easy to understand. And I think striking that kind of balance can be difficult, because especially there are certain words that I didn't know that I've had to pick up over the past 3 years working in life sciences, where it's a case of, okay, I feel comfortable writing about that now, but me 3 years ago, probably not.
Yeah. I imagine it's something, because there's so many moving parts all the time, and with the last year especially, you must have just got such a deeper understanding of, like you say, topics that you were unfamiliar with before.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I think the way I used to separate it in my mind, our 3 publications, I think in certain ways we've become closer than ever, and in certain aspects, especially medtech and pharma, in terms of, for example, antibody testing. I mean, that is going to be as relevant to medtech as it is to pharma, because what do the vaccines give you? Antibodies. What do you need to so that's the pharma side. But what do you need to know to show that, or what tool do you need to show that you've got antibodies present in your system? An antibody test. That's medtech. That's probably the simplest example of 2020-21 in life sciences.
Yeah. So just got one final question then. So we've talked about kind of, we've reflected on the past year, and we've talked a little bit about what could be coming next, and kind of your focus, I suppose, in the long term. But I suppose now, we've said also about restrictions about to be lifted, and potentially lots of change ahead. Is certainly kind of an unpredictable future still for everybody, isn't it? So what's your kind of, I suppose, short-term plan for the rest of the year? Is it kind of trying to get back to normal? Have you got this new normal? Have you got a totally different approach, or do you not know?
I don't think anybody really knows, do they? First and foremost, I think we just want to have a successful show back. I mean, it'd be great to see as many people at the NEC in September talking about medtech as possible, and feeling as comfortable as possible. I think that's one thing that we should put out there. I mean, I think I've actually mentioned this in my editor's letter for the July-August issue, in terms of, as much as I want to see people back, I want them to be as comfortable as possible, which is one of the reasons why, despite certain things about personal choice. For example, it's not a personal choice for me to wear a mask because I'm protecting other people. I might be double vaccinated, others might not be, and I want people to feel as comfortable that they're not going to get a potentially deadly illness by coming to our show. So it's to get back to as normal as possible in terms of being able to interact with people, being able to showcase some wonderful new innovations that our industry has put together over the past 18 months or so. I mean, that would be that is the first and foremost aim. Whatever follows from there, we'll see. I mean, it'd be nice to get back abroad again, to see shows in other parts of the world, but I think we're going to have to go with baby steps as much as the government's trying to do giant strides at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, Ian, it was absolutely lovely to talk to you. Thank you for that.
No problem. Lovely to see you again. Hopefully we'll be in person next time.
That would be great, wouldn't it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.